Well, hello there, Colts Nation. I am back. After really an unexpected, unplanned hiatus, I did go away to Boston for a second, but certainly not for the entire length of my absence. And I could get into excuse-making mode and all the reasons that was, but I know you guys don't actually care. You really just want to hear me talk about the Indianapolis Colts, right? And apparently, as per a poll I took on the page, there's a decent amount of you that didn't even realize that I hadn't posted, which to some degree, I must say, hurts a little bit. Because I'd like to believe that over here on the channel, in this community, at this Colts page, with all of you guys, that we have somewhat of a special connection. And I'm sure some of you did, of course, miss me to some degree. And I missed being in front of this camera and talking. Now, that being said, if there was ever a time for me to take a hiatus from this channel and take a little bit of time, I mean, this might have been it, right? We are kind of in a very, very slow period. Like, when it comes to rookie camp, sure, that's happening and sure, that's going on. But there's really not much to learn from rookie camp, right? Barring anything spectacular that's happening. But also, I'm not there or anything like that. I'm 800 miles away. I'm out here in Long Island, New York. And much like you, all I do is see the minimal clips that we get access to on social media. And that's all good and well. And it's nice to get excited about these guys, but we're not learning anything yet, right? You don't really learn anything about this team at this point until we get into training camp. Like last year, training camp was an incredibly fruitful experience for me. One, because it was the first time I had ever done that type of thing. I'd never been to any NFL training camp, let alone the Colts training camp, because, well, I don't live in Indiana, right? So it was kind of cool to see all of that in progress, and I was able to kind of get a sneak peek as to what we were going to see. Like, I knew that Anthony Richardson was better than people were saying he was, right? I knew Josh Downs was going to be involved in this offense early and often because I was seeing them draw up plays for him in training camp. So training camp is really where you get some of the insights going into the season, things that those who did not go to training camp may not quite know as like a fact. I don't even know. Point being, that's where you learn something about the team. Right now, it's just dead space, speculation, and talking about talking, but it's all good because we can talk about talking. Hell, that's what we do over here. And I have not talked about A.D. Mitchell, Adonai Mitchell, since we've drafted him, really, all things considered, at least not in excess. And I know it's the cool thing now to be high on A.D. Mitchell, and we all want to talk about like we know something that other people don't. And listen, we do, right? We have him, and there's a couple people around the league that are high on him. But overall, us Colts fans, we're going to be the ones that get to see this star emerge in this league. But a lot of you who have been here know that that was my guy before we drafted him, right? Like, I really felt that outside of those top 3 wide receiver prospects in this draft, that he was the best wide receiver there, and it wasn't even particularly close. I can even see him being better than any of the guys that were drafted in the top 3. Of course, we're talking about Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, those types of guys. I could see A.D. Mitchell being above any or all of those guys, and I know that sounds crazy now, but realistically, you don't know until you know. So for those of you saying there's no chance he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr., there's no chance he's better than Malik Neighbors, you don't know that, right? There's guys drafted all the time that don't live up to their potential. All I'm saying is that I'm not going to back off now, right? That was my guy. That was arguably my favorite prospect in that entire draft. And for us to draft him, I mean, that never happens. To go into a draft and have a favorite prospect and your team come away with him is such a rare feat that I cannot take it for granted. And for it to happen was an absolute treat for me. So as we talk today about this Colts offense and what I expect from them, do keep in mind, I'm practically assuming Adonai Mitchell is one of the elite rookie wide receivers this year. So take that as you may. But with that said, I know a lot of you guys are starting to come around on him, which is very, very cool to see. But one thing I also feel like I'm seeing quite a bit from Colts Nation is somewhat of a low expectation for this team. And it's not to say that my expectation is Super Bowl or anything like that, but I do feel like as fans sometimes, all we're doing is talking about that. We're all talking about what we don't have, right? Like, we're talking about the lack of a secondary and all that type of stuff. And I feel like sometimes as a fan, you can get so caught up in that type of stuff that you're missing what is right in front of you. And with the return of Anthony Richardson, with the addition of Adonai Mitchell, with Jonathan Taylor, healthy, happy, new contract, full offseason, all of that stuff, Josh Downs presumably taking a step forward for this team. I thought he really showed flashes of being a special football player in his rookie year. You're talking about an offense in the Indianapolis Colts that has potential to be one of the top 3 to 5 offenses in this league. Like, you look back at the 2022 Philadelphia Eagles. Of course, that was the Eagles team that led Shane Steichen to getting this head coaching job with us in Indianapolis, right? That was a 14-3 football team. Now, of course, they had a top 3 defense in football to go along with that offense, but offensively, they were number 3 in total yards per game, number 3 in scoring, number 5 in rushing, number 9 in passing. And you think about what they had in place from a personnel standpoint, it wasn't all that far off from what the Colts had, right? You have the elite offensive line in place, one that you can trust all the way from the left tackle through to the right tackle. Some of you guys may say, well, you can't trust Will Fries. I beg to differ. I thought he played quite all right last year. And then you take into account the rookies we drafted this year. I'm not worried about this offensive line whatsoever. You say, okay, they had Jalen Hurts. We have Anthony Richardson. If you ask me personally, as good as Jalen Hurts is as a football player, don't be fooled by this past season. That boy can play. That guy can play. I say boy, he's probably just as old as me. He can play. I do think Anthony Richardson, from a talent perspective, has more upside than Jalen Hurts. There's that. Jonathan Taylor versus Miles Sanders. Who are you picking, right? And then you say, okay, well, the Eagles had A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Fine, fair enough. But I think you look at the Colts 3-man unit of Michael Pittman Jr., who's one of the top 15 to 20 wide receivers in this league, no questions asked. You have Josh Downs, who I think is going to end up really by his third year in this league, if not this season, establishing himself as one of the premier slot receivers in this game. And then Adonai Mitchell on the outside. You take those three, I think they can match that Eagles production at wide receiver, if not exceed it. Well, all right. You have all of those pieces in place, and then now we know, because of last season, that Shane Steichen, not Nick Sirianni, was the mastermind behind that Eagles offense. You look at this Colts offense and think to yourself, just how good can they be? Now, at least I'm looking at the Colts offense and thinking that. I think maybe some of you are kind of caught up on what we lack on defense, right? But the reality of the situation is that if you could come out and score 28 points per game, I mean, barring your defense is like the worst in the league, you're going to win quite a few football games if your offense is playing at that high of a level, right? And I think the Colts have that potential. Now, of course, it all starts with Richardson, not just his play, but his health as well. We know this, but that can be said for anybody. I know we're a little bit more worried about Anthony Richardson's health than maybe some other teams would be about their quarterback's health. But even the Bengals, you would think, have to worry about Joe Burrow's health a little bit, but we don't put that disclaimer on them when we talk about the Bengals and what they could bring to the table, right? It just is what it is. So I want to talk about what I think really is what this offense is going to look like. Again, starts with Richardson. I think there's a very high likelihood that he comes back and is actually better than what we saw. Some of you may not think that. I want to talk about why I feel that way, and I want to talk a little bit about this receiving core with the addition of Adonai Mitchell and just how much better I think he makes that receiving core, how that changes things, what his upside is in this offense, and whatever else pops up throughout the episode, we'll talk about. But before we do all that stuff, you know what it is. I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone watching the YouTube video, enjoying it, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Audio listeners, 5-star review. Let the people know how much you enjoy it. If you hate it, shut it off. Don't leave a review. Don't do nothing. It's over, right? You ain't got to do shit. That being said, we're already like 8 minutes into this damn thing. So if you're here, how much can you possibly hate the show? We're trying to get to 3,000 subscribers over here by the upcoming season. We're nowhere close. Let's shoot for 2,500 first. If you keep coming back, enjoying the content, well, perhaps today's the day to subscribe. If you have not yet, my head is itching. That's all I got for the intro. I'm sweating right now. I had the AC on in my room. I don't know what's going on. It's very, very humid in here. Sweating my ass off. But regardless, let's talk about the offense. Let's keep it together. I'm a little rusty over here in the microphone because it's been a while since I've spoken to you. But we're going to start talking about Anthony Richardson first and kind of why I feel it's likely that he comes back and is significantly better than he was. I know it's optimistic on some level, but I don't think it's optimism without warrant, and I will never do that. I will never sit here and be optimistic for the most part without it being warranted. Like, I'm going to come out here and be honest. I just so happen to consistently feel good since I started this show about where the Colts are. But let's talk about Richardson and kind of where I stand there, because I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of fans have is that the only way you can get better is to play. Like last year when we were having the discussion about whether or not Anthony Richardson should be the week 1 starter over Gardner Minshew, despite the fact that clearly it ended up being the case that Richardson should start, Before we had seen him play in training camp, that was not certain. And for some people said, well, you have to let him play because you drafted him number 4. And the only way he could get better is to get on the field. And it's not to say that the reps on the field aren't the best way to get better at the game of football. I would say generally they are, but it's not to say that there's no benefit or there's no advantage to actually being on the bench versus being in the game. Like have just the benefit of being able to step back sometimes and look at a situation can do wonders. Like, have you ever been in a spot like that where you're so caught up in a situation and you're so deeply entrenched in it that you almost have to remove yourself from it to be able to look at it objectively? I'm not sure if you've ever been in that spot. I know I have many times been in that spot, even at the quarterback position. I play quarterback, by the way, for my team in flag football. Been having a terrible season so far, but that's neither here nor there. Perhaps they should bench me and I should take a look. Perhaps I should hurt my shoulder, right? Regardless, all I'm saying, right? Like sometimes you can be so deep in the forest that you can't see the trees, is my point. Now, I'm not saying that right there is what we saw with Anthony Richardson. I'm just saying that to illustrate the point, to be able to step back at the quarterback position and watch the game without the pressure of performing and the speed of the game as a factor. It gives you kind of a moment to reflect or analyze things, right? In a way that you wouldn't be able to if you were on the field, right? Like, because imagine something happens and a play happens. You have to have a short memory. You're on to the next play. The clock has started and you got to go on right to the next play. And that is what it is. But when you're on the sideline watching, you don't exactly have to move at that speed. So you can sit there with a thought a little bit more, right? You could sit there and break something down a little bit more without the pressure of having to get to the next play. You don't quite have that luxury when you're on the field. So if you are engaged while you're on the sideline, it's actually possible from the mental aspect of the game. Sure, there's like a muscle memory and things that come with repetition that aren't the mental aspect of the game, but I'm talking strictly from the mental aspect of the game. Seeing something, analyzing it, and then coming out with a better understanding of it, you might be able to absorb more information on the sideline sometimes as opposed to when you're on the field. Now, I would love to speak to someone who plays in the NFL to confirm that for me, but I could speak to that on like a amateur level of someone who didn't play at the highest level but has played football. Like, I can speak to that and say that's been true for me personally. So I'm only personalizing on that front, right? And the beauty of knowing that is that what we've come to learn about Anthony Richardson is that his work ethic is that of someone who has at best like an eighth of the talent that he has, right? And Jim Bob Cooter was quoted recently. He had spoken a little bit about what he had seen from Anthony so far this offseason, albeit very early. And the way he put it is that it is clear in Anthony's approach to this offseason from the cerebral aspect, from the mental aspect, which speaks to kind of what I was just talking about, that this is not the rookie that they drafted. This is not the guy. And that is super encouraging because last year, the guy we saw week 1, hell, the guy that we saw in training camp last year in Anthony Richardson was so wildly different than the guy that we watched on tape at Florida. For those of you who were watching the draft, or rather watching the rookies and their tape prior to the draft, you know what I mean. The guy that we saw play for the Indianapolis Colts looked completely different on the field than the guy that we saw on the Florida Gators, right? And I don't recall ever in my life seeing somebody progress that much from their senior year, or I guess their last year of college, to their rookie year in this league. Maybe Justin Herbert, now that I think about it. And I'm sure there's a few others. But the point is that the way he was able to progress was remarkable. And it speaks to how seriously he takes the mental aspect of this game. And that is part of what makes him so special as a quarterback. Of course, we know his physical talent, not just as a runner, but in terms of his actual arm. But to have an arm is not the same as to be a great passer in this league. Some of you may know what I mean by that. Some of you may require further explanation. So for those of you who do understand what I mean by that, excuse me as I try to explain it a little bit further. There's more to being a great passer in this league than just being able to make every throw. There's also, right, like if you have a really strong arm, not every throw always requires that you use all of your arm strength. Like sometimes you have to take a little bit off of it. There's something called ball placement, right? Where you want to put it where the defender can't get it. Like there's nuances to passing that are not just your ability to throw the ball. That wasn't my best explanation that I've ever given, but hopefully I got you pretty close there. If not, one day maybe I will, right? But when you look at a guy like Jalen Hurts, I only bring up Jalen Hurts because he was also coached by Shane Steichen. We all knew what Jalen Hurts brought physically to the table. What we did not realize he brought, and what really allowed him to take a leap in this league, was the ability to really become a passer first and a runner second, right? It's that same skill set that Anthony Richardson brings, but with way more arm talent and way more upside. So you look at it and you say, okay, if you're a defensive coordinator and you're against Anthony Richardson with Shane Steichen, what we know he brings to the table, if Anthony Richardson is able to come out there with poise, accuracy, there's nuance in his ball placement as a passer, if he's making the right decisions consistently and with confidence, excuse me, as I get a sip of water, if all of those things are happening, along with the fact that he's a threat to run at any given moment, you have a problem on your hands as a defensive coordinator. And that's just assuming the Colts do what they did last year and have what they had last year on the offensive side of the ball, right? This was a top 5 scoring offense with Anthony Richardson on the field, albeit with a small sample size. We understand this much. But again, that's without all the things I mentioned earlier, with JT healthy and happy and with the new contract, the experience gained all around from Josh Downs to really the entire offense, right? This was one of the youngest teams in football, the second youngest team in football, may I add. And you talk about even the offensive line. You got guys like Raymond, Freeland, all the guys they brought in. They did not get much older on the offensive side of the football, which does bring me to Adonai Mitchell. It brings me to Adonai Mitchell to some degree. I mean, that was a poor transition, I must admit. But nonetheless, I want to talk about him because I'm starting to see some chatter that he may end up being our wide receiver number 1. And while I think in year 1, that is blasphemy, I do think when you look at his skill set and what he brings to the table and his upside, I can see a world where that is. And it's mostly because Michael Pittman Jr., right? I love Michael Pittman Jr. I defend him more than most, right? I think that he really has the chops to be a wide receiver 1 in this league, albeit he needs a nice wide receiver number 2 next to him, which now we have, right? But Michael Pittman Jr., as good as he is not a consistent deep threat. Now, perhaps he's better than he's had the ability to show because of the quarterbacks we've had in place for him, because you've had guys like Phillip Rivers, whose deep ball was compromised by the time he had gotten here. Gardner Minshew, who obviously had limitations throwing the football down the field. Matt Ryan, who couldn't throw, I mean, not for anything. Come on, right? So Michael Pittman Jr. as a deep threat and as a threat down the field hasn't had the opportunity to show everything he could show. But just from a skill set aspect alone, what Adonai Mitchell brings is something completely different. His speed down the field is the real deal. Like Michael Pittman Jr., I think, can get there. Adonai Mitchell, you're talking about a guy that has blazing speed, but also shows the ability to run routes at all levels of the field. He's not a one-trick pony. He's not going to go down the field and only do that, right? He really has all of the route running chops on all levels of the field, just like Michael Pittman Jr., but with more athleticism. He's also 6'4", right? If I'm not mistaken. If not, he's 6'3", all right? Don't feel the need to correct me on that one. He's a big dude and has everything that you want in an elite wide receiver. My comparison for him was A.J. Green. Like, that's who he reminded me of when I watched him. Kind of like an A.J. Green type of guy. And, man, if he could come out and play the way I think he's able to play, the way I think he will play, the passing game of the Indianapolis Colts, everyone I think thinks about the running game and what Anthony brings on the ground as a runner, coupled with that offensive line, coupled with Jonathan Taylor, you could potentially be looking at a prolific passing offense here as well, which would be kind of the unexpected piece of this offense. I think when people think about the great passing offenses in this division, they look at the Jaguars, they look at the Texans. If I'm not mistaken, as I record that the schedule is out, I saw a leak, Colts-Texans week 1. As of right now, Anthony Richardson 1-0 against C.J. Stroud, as is. It's just good stuff. Now, I don't know if I said a whole lot of insightful stuff during this episode, but my point is that this offense, guys, we cannot sleep on it. Last year, my big predictions coming into the season was 1, that Anthony Richardson was better than he thought, 2, that the Colts would be fighting for a 7 seed, which they absolutely were, and 3, that was a big-time defensive line and that the defense wasn't really all that bad, right? I think we could look at it now and say most of that was right. I think a lot of you guys think the defense was horrible. No disrespect. I think we were looking at the same thing, but perhaps we weren't. That was not a terrible defense that the Colts had last year. That was a average defense that struggled giving up big plays, right? I think they can only go up this year. If the Colts come out and play average to, Lord forbid, above average defense, and this offense just delivers as what I feel is clear that they will, given health, guys, this right here is the AFC South title. In the year that you expect at least, this is when it happens. The beauty of the NFL is that just when you think you know what it is that you're talking about, it finds a way to humble you. And when 90% of people are looking one way, it's wise to look the other. No one expects the Colts to come in here and win this division this year, not even you, and not even really any Colts fan, right? With that said, this right here, with this offense, it's early, but I think you know what I'm saying. So, until next time, whenever that may be, my name is Justin. This right here was the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. Hopefully this episode was as good as some of my others. I did not feel the same energy. Did you guys feel the same energy? Did you feel like, Justin, you're kind of rusty. You probably shouldn't take 2-week hiatuses anymore, right? Whatever it was, let me know. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. All that mumbo jumbo. Like, subscribe, blah, 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 blah. Until next time, go Colts.